Introduce you and then we can begin. It's almost over. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the seminar series. Today, we are very happy to have Dr. Vivek Sharma from University of Lancaster Management School. So, he's a visiting researcher there. He's also affiliated with Australian National University, where he is a research associate at the Center for Applied Macroeconomic Analysis. His areas of interest are in the fields of macrofinance, macro banking, and international macroeconomics. So welcome, Dr. Vivek. So today he'll be presenting his research paper titled The Effects of Bank Shocks. So you have about 45 minutes to present your work, but you have time till 5:15. You can take up questions and discussion post your seminar, post your talk, or you can take clarification questions.
If I exceed 45 minutes by 10.
That's okay. I mean, you can time it accordingly. You have time up till 5:15.
Okay.
So, yeah, over to you.
Thanks for a very nice introduction. And please let me say that you can hear it, right? Please let me say that I'm very thankful for this opportunity to be here at IGIDR to talk about my work, and I'm immensely grateful for the generous hospitality that IGIDR has shown me. I did most of this work while I was initially a member until last year, and that's why you still see that I'm an affiliation even though I'm no longer there. So what this will be about, by the way. So I'll be mostly talking about a model, and as I go along, I will talk about where does that model come from, what does it do, what is its critical relevance. So there are a lot of papers, by the way, on financial predictions, and people who do macroeconomics, they're probably very well familiar with BGC type of models, Bernanke, Rutgers type of model. And then there are other papers by Rutgers and Ferrari, and there are many iterations of those models. Sometimes you will just see an epsilon variation of that model, but it's good enough for the purpose that people want to use that model for. And that's why you have still a lot of papers still being written and published, sometimes pretty well outlets using, again, just an iteration of these models. So by now, there were very wide consensus that financial frictions have very significant macroeconomic implications when firms and households cannot borrow as much as they need to or as much as they want to. It has implications on economic activity. This is what I mean by financial frictions or financial shocks. What is missing from this class of models, and as I said, again, there are hundreds of iterations of these models, is a very realistic picture of banking sector, which is presence of bank lending relationship. When I say bank lending relationship, what do I exactly mean? So if you look at data, so these papers have documented that data. I don't have data on my own, and I will explain why I don't have data on my own. So if you look at data, you will see that firms are repeatedly borrowing from the same bank or set of banks. Why do I say a bank or set of banks? Because many times you will see that if a firm is big enough, it does not rely on just one lender, one bank for its borrowing needs. It could be for a number of reasons. It could be local business practice in that sector, in that geographic area. It could also be because if you are a large enough firm, you do not want to put all your eggs in one basket. What if your lender lands into trouble? What if your bank goes under? You want to diversify your risk. So for just a number of reasons, you will see that firms are not necessarily sticking with just one lender, but sometimes multiple lenders. And there's a lot of documents, extensive evidence for that. One of the very well-known papers are papers by Peterson and Rajan. So this Rajan is the same Brown Rajan that many of you probably know. So they wrote a series of papers in 1992, 1994, 1995, and they documented extensive evidence of bank lending relationships in the US. And that is the US evidence. And then there are papers by Ungena Smith. This is again a very well-known paper, probably, unless I'm wrong, probably more than 100 citations. And it came out in Journal of Financial Intermediation. They looked at a sample of 11 major Eurozone economies, which included countries like Italy, France, Greece, Portugal, Ireland. And again, they found very significant evidence for repeated firm and bank borrowing. And that paper came out in 2000. So we are now in 2024, so almost a quarter century old. So something might have changed, right? You might guess so. But then there's a very recent working paper by Koskova, Madhurani, and
because there are people who joined online as well.
When you say bank, bank has SDF or a branch.
So I will only consider bank as a whole, one aggregate entity, and the firm borrowing.
The branch and
so the data,
SBI.
So the data, to the best of my knowledge, records aggregate borrowing between banks and firms, and does not differentiate like different functions. So not like
Bank.
bank which has a banking license in that jurisdiction, a commercial bank. Like
It's a branch. They're emitting their locations. Yeah.
So the sample, for example, if you look at Magaloni, Pukutsi, and Squadri, that is ECB data. So they have data for each country, and within country they can see that certain firms are literally borrowing from the same bank, period after period, year after year. So
So is it not been us, is it not the laws or the policy? So you can ban, so let's say you are for the it's possible for you to borrow from let's say bank or branch there. Can also,
I don't know if the data records the data only records like the get borrowing between, let's say, from A and bank X. It doesn't say like, okay, which branch is a bank X.
locational.
I mean, if you were to ask me, I would say, what would be your incentive if I'm based in Mumbai? Why would I borrow from the city? Why would I borrow from a bank branch in Bangalore?
I have a quick question, sorry.
Sure.
So this relationship matters for big firms. Or all kinds of.
So again, you just preempted. So I was just going to say that if you look at the data, you will find. Okay. So if you look at the data, you will find a lot of heterogeneity. So small firms versus big firms, and there's a lot of geographic variation even among countries. So you will find that firms on the average are borrowing from 5 or 6 banks in Italy. But if you go to Ireland, they are barely borrowing from only one bank or sometimes 2 banks. So there are a lot of heterogeneity, big banks versus small banks, big corporations versus small corporations. For the sake of this modeling exercise, I want to build as simple model as possible. Why? Because it makes my life easy. It allows me to draw sharp conclusions. I will build a very simple setup, so there will be no heterogeneity. You will only have a continuum of events in each class, and we are at the event. There will be no like big borrowers, small borrowers, big banks, small banks. That would be a very interesting exercise, but so far I haven't been able. So I was here probably. This is like the most cutting edge evidence of bank on lending relationship, which is an ECB working paper by Madhurani Kapulsen QRT, and they have data until October 2019. So just before that when arrival of COVID pandemic. And obviously, if you work in this literature, you know that this is very granular, detailed, confidential data set. I think Madhurani and Kapulsen are at ECB, that's why they have access to this data set. This QRT is a professor at used, by the way, the same university from which I got my PhD. So they again document extensive bank on lending relationship among a sample of 11 or 12 Eurozone economies, which together account for 70 to 80% of EU GDP. So what I was trying to say that whatever Ungena has been documented a quarter century back is very much still true. You still have a lot of bank from lending relationship, not only in EU, which is obviously the largest economy on this planet, but also the US. For the US, I'm only aware of these papers. There might be more recent work, but I don't know about them yet. I would love to see if there are similar studies about India too. But again, I don't know if you haven't known about similar studies with document bank lending relationship in the case of India. It would be a very interesting thing to do. I would love to know about that. So what do I do in this paper? So I want to focus on again a very simple setup, which allows me to say what I want to say. So I will build a very simple RBC model. Since I'm not interested in monetary policy, particularly in the inflation, I could build a nominal model. It's PSC model, which is very popular in certain fields of macro, very popular at central banks, by the way, for policy analysis and scenario analysis. And I will have 3 types of agents. I will have households, peasant households, I will have banks, and I will have entrepreneurs. So there will be continuum of agents in each class, but they are all alike. So in equilibrium, I can focus only on one representative household, one representative bank, one representative entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs are synonymous with firms in this model. Keep it in mind. All the firms are owned by entrepreneurs. So when I say entrepreneur, I mean firms. When I say firms, I mean entrepreneurs. And the only source of funding for banks is probably used to do. So the only source of funding for banks is deposits that they raise from household. There is no bank liquidity, there is no bank capital in this model. Again, why? Because I don't think it is necessary for them. Super essential for the things that I want to show you. You can think of an extension where you can specify a large portion of bank capital, you can include that. My hunch is that it will moderate some of the impact, but it is only my hunch. I can usually say that on a scale of model and solutions. So All the banks are owned by the household. They are the ultimate owners. Like household, and banks have to pay interest rate on those deposits. And whatever profit they make, they have to rebate it to the household who are the ultimate owners. And then you have entrepreneurs, which are synonymous with firms. They take out loans from the banks and they have to make loan repayments. There is no household borrowing by the way in this model, so there's only one type of loan, corporate loan, both forms. So this is where I will introduce bank firm lending relationship. This portion will be like super standard Mickey Mouse kind of RBC model. This is very good. So I will introduce the sense of bank firm lending here, and this is where I will introduce bank. So far I have not spoken about this, by the way. So bank shop is a so a bank shock is any exogenous negative shock, which is supposed to capture negative developments in the environment which lead to a decline in bank repayment. I can give you two examples, easy examples. For example, it could be that NPS are rising in the economy, which will reduce the effective amount of loan repayments to the banks. That's one example of a negative bank shock. Another example could be that because of economic deterioration, banks are forced to restructure their debt and as a consequence have to accept higher and higher haircuts. So higher and higher haircuts. Sorry. So bigger and bigger haircuts on their loans that will also lead to a reduction in their bank loan repayments. These are the type of situations that my banks are trying to capture. So any negative development which reduces exogenous development which reduces the amount of bank loan repayment.
Are you trying to, sorry, just one turn. Here you are focusing on the experience of the banks in individual situations rather than a very class of problems like, let us say the extreme example being COVID. That's a shock for sure, but that affected everything. You're not considering bigger shocks like that. You're talking about management in the presence of their decisions. So specific type of risks. So shocks in that sense.
This is an exogenous shock level. So it is not endogenously determined, and it is supposed to capture anything that banks do not control, but it still leads to a decline in bank loan repayment. COVID could be an example provided with the caveat that it's an extreme example, as you said.
It's an extreme example which will affect everybody else. You are not considering that. You are looking at the functioning of the bank or the management or their decision making in the context of what they have done. Right. Individual case.
So you have a representative within models and equilibrium you have only one bank. So the way it's an interesting question. I got something similar at another place when I'm giving the same talk. Somebody had a very similar question, and I'm thankful to them because they gave the answer for me. So the way to rationalize this is either you assume that there is only one bank and it gets hit by this shock, and then the model shows you what happens, or you assume that there are a number of banks as you realistically have in any economy, but this shock hits all the banks at the same time.
No, representative firm, representative person.
Yeah.
That of course you have to take for model building.
Yeah.
But you can amplify from there. Yeah. But that is not the case I'm saying. Yeah. I'm talking about the general functioning of the bank in a situation in which their decisions affect the outcomes, right?
So I will take as a given that a negative bank shock materializes, and then the model will show you what happens afterwards.
I'm just saying that it's not a generic problem. Yeah, right, go ahead.
Not a common.
Not a common.
Idiosyncratic shock is only that.
Yeah.
So before I get into the literature and try to distinguish my work from previous work and explain how my paper fits into the existing literature, let me very quickly talk about what kind of results I'm going to show you in probably 20-30 minutes. So I'll show you that after negative bank shock, you have a very persistent decline in macroeconomic activity if you ignore bank funding relationship. You have a smaller impact when the shock hits, but a very persistent decline in aggregate economic activity. That is if you abstract away from bank funding relationship. If you take into account, if you do take into account bank from lending relationship, you will see a larger amplification of the shock at impact, but a faster macroeconomic recovery. So you will see that bank from lending relationship work as a dual-edged sword. They magnify the initial impact, but then they lead to a macroeconomic recovery later on. If you ignore them, then you have a slightly smaller impact when the bank shocks hit, but a very persistent macroeconomic decline. And then I will follow this baseline exercise with a couple of other exercises in which I will show you that the impact of bank shocks are increasing in the intensity and persistence of lending relationship. Let me say that these results will also serve as an robustness exercises. So it's a calibrated model, and I will talk about when I reach that section about 2 or 3 key parameters. When I talk about changing intensity and consistency of bank from lending relationship, I only talk about 2 parameters. When I vary those parameters, I will be able to show you that my baseline results will still go through. So they serve 2 purposes. They show that bank from lending relationships are increasing in the intensity and persistence of bank from lending relationship, but they also serve as a robustness exercises that if you change these 2 key parameters, my results are still robust, they will still go through. And towards the end, I will have 1 or 2 other exercises in which I will play with the volatility and persistence parameter of the bank shock. And I think I will have something interesting to show you. I will talk more about that when we reach there. So this is the state of this is the current state of literature in this field. So allow me to talk first about point 1 and point 4, and then I go back to point 2 and 3. So there's a vast literature on different iterations of financial frictions, financial shocks that my paper broadly is connected with. Obviously, I cannot mention all of them. It probably takes hundreds of A4 pages. So I'm giving you some of the most famous papers. So there are very famous papers by Geraldine Harris and Singularity, people who work again in microfinance, banking, financial frictions. They are very well familiar with that. So what they do, they build a DSC model of European banking system with sticky deposit rates, sticky lending rates, and then they perform a hot shot exercises by introducing various shocks and looking at their macroeconomic effects. Then there are other famous papers by Justiniano, Primiceri, and Tambalotti. I think it's 2015 review of economic data, and they look at if collateral shocks have any meaningful impact on real estate prices in the US. And then you again have a bunch of papers by German Padrini, 24 IGIDR, and Jacobiello, again, review of economic dynamics, and Cristiano Mucciano. If you look at the model, again, as I said, that a lot of models are nothing but just different iterations of the model. If you look at the model in Cristiano Mucciano, it's an AR paper, by the way. But if you look at the model, you can see very tangible, very clear, a lot of similarity in the model. What they do is they introduce a volatility shock to the productivity of entrepreneurs, and they conclude that these shocks have been a major driver of US business cycle for the last 2 decades. That is the whole crux of the paper. But if you look at their model, it's very similar with BGD. My model is entirely different. So I'm just trying to emphasize that. And then there are papers on lending relationship. This is the strand of papers. If you open any one of them, even if right now you'll see a lot of similarity with my model. So what these papers do, they use a modeling device called deep habits to model persistence in lending. So sometimes I'll say persistence in borrowing. So keep in mind that what is lending from my side, as the bank is borrowing from your side as a borrower. So Stephanie Smith Grohe and Uribe, people who do international macro, probably they're probably familiar with them. So Stephanie Smith Grohe and Uribe were the first ones to come up with this deep habit framework to model persistence in consumption. And it was a paper in Review of Economic Studies 2006. And that framework was adopted 4 years later by Aliaga Diaz and Olivero, and they wrote a paper in 2010, JMCV. So they were the first one to introduce deep habit in banking to model persistence in borrowing or lending. And what they did, they introduced this deep habit in a standard macro model, and then they studied the impact of various macroeconomic shocks like the negative TFT shock and what happens afterwards. Then there are a bunch of papers by Afsai, Basu, and Porto Martinez. They look at impact of bank from lending relationship on transmission of monetary policy. Then there are papers by Melina and Bia. They look at impact of fiscal policy in presence of bank from lending relationship. Then there is a paper by Ravan who looks at bank competition not only on interest rate but also on collateral requirements. So most of you probably know that if you approach a bank for a loan for any significant amount of money, banks will probably ask you to post collateral. and banks sometimes choose whether they ask you to post like an asset which is like 90% of the amount of loan that you want to pay, or 5% or at least 1%. So government takes into account this competition too, that banks compete not only on how much to charge you as a borrower, but what kind of LTV requirement to impose. I mean, 90%, 95%, or 85%, whatever. Then again, there are a bunch of papers, Melina and Villa, Hidalgo and Olivero. I think Shapiro and Olivero is the most recent paper. It came out in European Economic Review, and they have a very similar setup. And what they do, they look at endogenous labor force participation as an amplification device in a very similar setup of bank and lending relationship. And as far as I know, this is the current state of it. So you will only find like 7, 8, probably 9 papers which use the fabric model of bank and lending relationship. I have a bunch of papers, full disclosure, none of them are published. They're still working papers, some of them even have typos. So if you spot them, my apologies in advance. The only reason I'm mentioning them here, I wouldn't have, but the only reason I'm citing them here is because I got a paper rejected last year because one of the referees wrote that this author is not citing his own papers, and it seems like he has many similar sounding papers on his website. And I don't know what is the difference between this paper and those papers, and what is the difference among those papers. And again, because papers are still incomplete, so that was my knowledge why I did cite them. But I took a lesson and I cite them, even though I know it will create another problem that some people will assume that I'm citing just because I want to show something. So I don't know which way to go, but anyway, I'm doing this. So this is where I begin the model, and I promise that except the point where I introduce bank lending relationship, the model will be very simple, like almost like a Mickey Mouse bank of toy model. So you have households, you have banks, you have entrepreneurs. So you have a representative household, very simple household. All they're trying to do is maximize the utility from lock consumption and holding of a real estate. It can be any durable asset. I call it real estate, housing, land, whatever you like. And the derive basically utility from their very common consumption. This is what they're trying to maximize. And they have a very standard budget constant, which simply says that their consumption changes in their housing stock. So this is housing, this is the price, plus their total stock of deposit cannot exceed what they obtain from labor income, plus whatever profits or dividends is given by the banks to them. Remember that all the banks owned by households, what the profit they make, it is given to them, and whatever they make in terms of deposit that they come to the banks. So if you form, if you form a Lagrangian and solve this very standard Mickey Mouse problem, you will end up with a structural condition with your consumption, deposits, housing or real estate, and labor. So this is the simplest optimization problem that you have in this paper. Now we move to the second, entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurs have been a simpler optimization problem. So far, they are trying to maximize their raw consumption, utility from raw consumption. And we further assume that borrowing of each entrepreneur is constrained to a fraction theta, that is loan to value ratio, of the total value of the assets. Yeah.
So when you are making the what is actually
So it is any bundle of general goods. So if you look at the model, they don't specify like whether you're buying refrigerator or you're buying clothes or whether you're buying fuel. It's like any consumption. There is explicit variable gear capital. It's not in their consumption, but that is an input in the production process. I'll show you probably in the next second or third slide from here. Absolutely. Yeah. This is very standard in this class of models, which is built on we look kind of setup. You assume that entrepreneurs can use just like percent households, any bundle of generic goods, but since they're entrepreneurs, they produce something, they will have a production function, and they will be subject to budget constraint. And if you again form a Lagrangian, you will have their cost condition is expected 6, 7. Yeah. So that I cannot do or I don't want to do that once I own by the household, because I want to separate. I want to have a separate class of agents who borrow from the banks. Banks are already owned by households. I do not want to use household borrowing. So that's why I need to have 3 distinct agents: households, banks and firms or entrepreneurs, and I only want to focus on firm borrowing from banks. I do not want to reduce borrowing from.
You're not, you're not considering lending to households. But there is some household income in your equipment there, and the income generation there.
So, household make deposits with the banks.
That's okay, but this is the income constant that you're talking. It's only a firm that you're talking about. The firm's income, that's all. The income of the firm from the business that they conduct, right?
Yeah.
So the domestic, I mean, the income, salaries and all those things.
You will see that in the entrepreneur's budget option.
I just want the definition.
So, this is, let me know if I answer your question. Sure. So, this is L, might look like I, but this is L. So, I was using a very horrible notation in some of my other talks, but I think I have improved it somehow. So, this is borrowing by entrepreneur J from bank K at time T. So, what they borrow cannot exceed a fraction theta, that is loan to value ratio of total value of their assets. And what is the value of their total assets? So their assets is nothing but the sum of expected value of their real estate holding, call it land, whatever, and the physical capital. So QK is price of physical capital, and KJT is the physical capital held by entrepreneur K. And this is where I begin to depart from Mickey Mouse kind of stuff so far. So if you use deep habit to model bank from lending relationship, we assume that entrepreneur's effective or habit adjusted borrowing looks like this. And I'll explain why I call it effective or habit adjusted borrowing. So we assume that what entrepreneur J borrows from bank K, what entrepreneur J borrows from bank, what entrepreneur J borrows at bank T from continuum of banks is nothing but a CES aggregate. Because remember that I said that if you look at the data, there is evidence that firms borrow not necessarily from one bank, but from set of banks, a continuum of banks. So I need to use an integral to aggregate your borrowing across a number of lenders. And the index is K, so I'm integrating with respect to the index of banks. So we assume that their habit adjusted borrowing, their maybe entrepreneurs, is nothing but this object. What does it say? It says that your habit adjusted or effective borrowing is LJK T minus a parameter gamma L, which captures intensity of your lending relationship, times a parameter SKT minus 1, and then you have a parameter epsilon, which captures the substitution of elasticity of substitution between different banks or different variety of loans. So we assume that different banks give you different variety of loans. At one level, what is a loan? Loan is nothing but an amount of money that you have borrowed from an institution, in this case a bank, and you have to pay. But then we assume that different banks give you slightly different services. For example, different banks will give different kind of paperwork requirements, and different banks will probably offer you different repayment terms. Different banks might even subject you to different LTV requirements. This is what is supposed to be captured by different varieties of loan or different banks.
Are they somehow giving their banks are listed?
Yeah.
But then that means that they are able to set their interest rate.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I reach the third area, bank and the last area, I'll show you that they have an optimization problem and they choose only two things: how much to charge and how much to.
But after choosing between how much they loan, given loan, or they are controlling how much they will charge the interest on the deposit and money.
So
Because then that will also implement that there is stickiness of the industry.
So we assume that on the deposit side of the banks, we have a perfectly competitive market. We take the deposit rate as given. And you have monopolistically competitive banking sector on the asset side, which is their books.
It's really different from the one who's also having the
Which one? So you have in case of household, you have HP, percent households, and here you have HE, that is real estate or land held by entrepreneurs. And when I show you the market conditions, I'll show you that it is fixed in the aggregate. So supply chain. So what exactly is happening is that there is a fixed amount of real estate, and it will only changing hands between these two areas. There is no endogenous supply of housing or real estate. The aggregate quantity is not increasing. So it's fixed at the limit, and it's only that some of the selling. Yeah. So some people are selling, some people are buying.
And these two are the
This one.
and
Yeah, so this is how we model persistence in borrowing if you use the diagram. So your habit adjusted borrowing looks like an integral of LJKT minus a parameter gamma n, which is the intensity of lending or borrowing parameter times SKT minus 1, and SKT minus 1 is supposed to capture your stock of habit borrowing from that bank period. So we assume that your lending relationship is specific to a bank. So if you have dealt more with a bank, you will develop over a period of time greater stock of habit in borrowing from that bank. Since it's a variable, again we need to come up with a law of motion for it. So it's law of motion. It is given by equation 11, which is a very standard, almost like the R1 looking type of equation. All it says is that your stock of habit from borrowing, your stock of habit in borrowing from bank A at time t minus 1 is nothing but an autocorrelation parameter times your stock of habit in borrowing from the same bank in the previous period, period before the previous period, times that object times SKT minus 1. And this is the beauty of this setup. If you just set these two parameters equal to 0, gamma L and rho S, the model is collapsed to the case of no bank relationship. And it's very easy to see. If you set rho S to 0, the first term on the right hand side will vanish. And your stock of habit in borrowing from bank T at time t minus 1 is nothing but SKT minus 1, what you have borrowed from that bank in the previous period. There is no persistence. Similarly, if you set gamma to 0, you will only have a series aggregate of LJKT, the different varieties of loan that you have obtained from different banks. Your intensity parameter and your stock of habit will not hold, because if gamma L is 0, this entire second term vanishes. So
how to differentiate between the stock of habit and the intensity of borrowing? Sometimes intensity of borrowing.
So this intensity of borrowing here is captured by gamma L, which is a parameter, and stock of habit is supposed to capture an endogenously evolving, because we is a variable we have to specify a law of motion. It is supposed to capture an evolving stock of habit in borrowing from that bank. If you borrow more from that bank, for example, then you are supposed to have a greater stock of habit in borrowing from that bank. And again, how strong that is indicated by parameter OS. So an autocorrelation parameter.
That's the relationship.
Yeah.
It depends on the transactions cost.
Yeah.
If you keep on changing the transactions cost.
So when I probably go to the second slide after this, I'll show you how it depends on not only how intense your lending relationship is, but also on how achievable it is.
That relationship is very important.
Yeah. So what I want to emphasize is that when I'll be showing you simulation results, I'll be comparing two versions of the model with lending relationship and the model without lending relationship. In the second case, without lending relationship, the only difference will be I'll set gamma to 0 and rho to 2. I will not touch anything else. All parameters, everything else will be the same.
So are you assuming the value of gamma L such a way that it's possible?
So
It's possible, but it is some. And
so
gamma L is close to 1 x. And most likely the rooms and period.
yeah.
So what and
So let me say this and then you can tell me how to distribute. So I cannot arbitrarily set any numerical value to gamma L to and rho S, because if I do that, that was what I will end up with. So when I do my numerical exercises, I will calibrate these two values and I will solve them from the other variable. But I will subsequently do other exercises in the parameters. It will never be one, by the way. If I do one, then I don't know what I have. Let's see.
how much the relation the effective point is
Stronger there.
this particular effective point.
Could be.
But the higher the stronger is the relation, higher the rating, right?
Yeah.
And stocks will be like we are accumulating, we are having more healthy efficiency, borrowing more, stock is increasing.
Yeah.
The likelihood of borrowing in future might be negative.
But the highest value that I will show you in my numerical exercise will be 0.72, which is estimated by the I will never exceed that.
What is it?
0.72, it will never reach 1. So,
But including layers, theoretically. So higher the relationship, higher, stronger the relations, you could expect gamma to be higher.
right,
But
yeah,
that is increasing, that's reducing the effective quality.
right.
It has a negative. Unless your stocks are negative or your gamma.
Yeah, I haven't had it. It's interesting.
Or maybe you adjust your It's that's something that's not.
I haven't really done that. So, but yes, it's just in point. But when I go to the calibration section, I will show you that gamma and rates are all estimate all from the again we do and they estimated it using this data. And this is the calibrated number. It depends on what case the percent is. Again, I will give you my justification for picking this particular number for haven't thought about that. What
I
I
think
guess
constraint optimization. You have to constrain your effective volume to the positive. Okay. Otherwise, I cannot manage. It's constraint optimization.
They cannot
It's sort of a constraint.
thank you. So, since entrepreneurs or firms bar they have a very standard EMP problem, expenditure minimization problem, they are trying to minimize the total expenditure on their borrowing, which is nothing but the product of their loans times the interest rate. If you solve this very standard EMP, you will end up with their effective demand for loans for bank K. And this is what I was alluding to. If you look at this expression 13, it has a very intuitive explanation. Again, if you set command to 0, the persistence in lending will start a habit play no role at all. As an entrepreneur, you will only care about this factor, which is RPTL divided by RTL. So how high or low it is to borrow from this bank compared to the aggregate interest rate. So this expression explains that as an entrepreneur, what I demand from a bank does not depend only on how cheap, comparatively speaking, it is to take a loan from that bank, but also on how intense and how persistent my lending relationship is with that bank. And we have entrepreneurs, we have to think about their production function. It's a very standard formula production function, which says that they combine labor from households, their real estate and physical capital to produce output. And we have to specify an exogenous loss function for physical capital, the minimum exogenous supply of physical capital here. And then we have entrepreneurs budget constraint. So it says that their consumption and their total expenditure on the loans cannot exceed their output minus what they have to pay in terms of labor wages to the household, minus their investment, minus changing their housing stock, plus what they owe to the bank. Again, if you form a Lagrangian and solve this very standard optimization problem, you will end up with their first order conditions with respect to consumption, loans, labor, real estate, physical capital, and investment. And that's it. That is entrepreneur's optimization problem. And now we have the last set of optimization problem for the banks. It's probably simpler than entrepreneur's optimization problem. So what do banks do? They are trying to maximize their total profit, which is given by this term capital pi KT. And what does it say? It says that banks are trying to maximize the difference between their total revenue, which is loans times the interest rate, that is repayment, minus what is spent on the deposits. Remember that it is the only source of funding, and the middle two terms are given by their balance sheet identity. So all the loans are equal to all the deposits. In this model, since I do not want to deal with this situation that banks raise 100 rupees of deposit, they make loans only of 70 rupees. What happens to that remaining 100 rupees? I'm not going to deal with that. So I exogenously assume, which is again a common assumption in this class of model. I assume that whatever deposit they raise is equal to the amount of loans that they make. So all the loans equal all deposit at all times. So if you plug this, LKT equals DKT, these two terms will cancel each other out, and you will notice that banks only care about the spread between what they lend and how much they have to pay to the deposit holders. And this object capital society in red is what I call a band shock. It's an exogenous shock which follows an AR1 process. And as I said, it's any negative sudden development in the economic environment that reduces the amount of bank loan repayment. And the paper focuses on what happens if you have bank loan lending relationship versus the case when you have no bank loan lending relationship. Something again which can be easily motivated if you look at empirical data, and something which has not been done before. To the best of my knowledge, no other people have done this. Banks will take the demand for loans as given. It comes from entrepreneur's optimization problem. They take it as given. Again, if you form a Lagrangian, and solve it, you will end up with the social condition with respect to how much to lend and how much to charge in terms of interest rate. So you have this variable YOTE, which is the Lagrange multiplier on the demand for bank's loan, and it captures the shadow value of giving 1 unit of loan by a bank to a borrower. What does it say? It says that the shadow value of giving 1 unit of loan by a bank is the time discounted value, 50 plus 1 is the bank's discount factor between 50 and 3 plus 1, is the time discounted value of the income that banks make on that interest rate spread, which is now subject to a shock. Plus, they also consider this fact that if we lure these borrowers to us because of deep habits, they will be with us also in the subsequent future period. So the shadow value of giving 1 unit of loan to them is not only what I make today at time RT, so at time T, but also the time discounted value of how much I can obtain in terms of economic benefits if these people will be, these funds will be with us also in the future. And again, you can see that if I set terminal to 0, this second term will disappear, and banks will only care about how much they make today in terms of their spread income. The considerations regarding what is the shadow value of locking you in with us for the future doesn't play any role at all. That is their first order condition with respect to how much to lend, that is LKT. And this is the first order condition with respect to how much to charge. And this shows a very standard trade-off when banks decide how much to charge you as a borrower. They realize that on one hand that by charging higher RTM, they will lose a bit of market share. This is given by parameter epsilon, which captures the elasticity of substitution between various banks. So they realize that if we charge high interest rate, we will lose a bit of market share. But they also realize at the same time that the new loans, which is given by the right hand side, will come due at the high interest rate. So we stand to make high profit in the future. So it captures a very standard economic trade-off. Raise your interest rate, risk losing a bit of your market share, but on the pro side, on the possible gain side, your new loans will come due at a higher interest rate. So you probably stand to make higher profit. Before I go to where aggregate business concerned, let me say just for 30 seconds that in this class of models which you keep having to model bank funding relationship, you will not see this shock cycle. So a cynic might say that okay, all you are doing is introducing the shock to bank profit function. That's all the intuition is. But as you see here in banks two first order condition, the introduction of this shock has fundamentally altered their first order condition, which capture their economic behavior. Now, in a setup which has no role, which simply does not consider this bank shock, doesn't take into account that banks will consider that the shock might materialize and it might alter the spread that they are making today or the effective amount of bank loan repayments tomorrow. And because of this shock, I am able to talk about what happens when you have a situation which is captured by bank shock with and without bank funding relationship, and on a mechanical level, if you just look at the equation, the shock appears in two first order condition of the bank, and banks have only two first order conditions. So I just wanted to get this out of the way here.
About 15 minutes.
I will exceed that my policy, so I will try to wrap it up in 15 minutes. So we have a total model, so we have to specify market clearing conditions. So we assume that total output is nothing but the sum of entrepreneurial investment and aggregate consumption, which is again the sum of household consumption and entrepreneurs. And this is what I was saying, that aggregate housing is fixed at an upper level, but it can change hands between households and entrepreneurs. Somebody might sell, somebody might borrow. So I solved the model using log linearization and first order multiplication, and as I said, I calculate the model by one. Since I'm not interested in any non-linearities, I don't have any questions which have anything to do with them. That's why I don't solve it non-linear. If I'm interested in that, I wouldn't log linearize, I would solve a non-linear model. And depending upon the question, you will probably not only use first order multiplication, but will use second order. But none of that is my concern in this paper. That's why I'm using first order multiplication and I'm solving a logarithm model.
So when you say that the firm has the power to control the interest rate charges on the loan, but then at the same time you look at the first order condition, so when you change the RTL, RTD also automatically changes. that kind of.
No, so we assume that because the deposit side of the bank is perfectly competitive, all the banks, they take the deposit rate as given.
So it will be market driven.
So in all the versions of this paper, I think I had like 2 or 3 versions. I never plotted RTD. I don't know what happens, but if you plot, for example, low 25 because of this condition, this one 25, you will see like one-to-one mapping. If no small deposit will also fall. But I don't know what happens to deposit rate. But yeah, but when I start seeing this simulation here, you will see that after a bank shock is paid, which is the difference between lending rate and deposit rate, jumps a lot in the case of bank financial relationship. So you will probably see deposit rate moving, but only by like a small fraction of what the change in RTL is.
Another thing I have considered is that when you consider a household as the owner of the bank,
Yeah.
then that means they already have the entire bank. And then they are depositing in their own bank and trying it.
So since I have a bank, I have to think about how the banks are funded, right? So and again, it chimes in again very good with the reality that probably any banks anywhere in the world, they have usually only 2 sources of funding: deposit and crypto and bank equity. Since just for the sake of simplicity, I abstract from bank equity, so I already lose one out of 2, one source of funding. So I have to keep one source of funding, that is deposit by the household. And again, you will see is that it's not a very harmful assumption, because if you look at publicly traded banks, like a lot of banks, who is their ultimate owner? Of course, you have like a couple of big shareholders, but a lot of their stock is held by common people.
But on the alternative hand, I think that it will be better to make also the owner of the account and not the bank. So in those cases, all those, I mean, these type of confusions. Like if there is some loss of the entrepreneur, or if they are not able to pay the loans, etc., then all the burdens will be borne by the but first entrepreneurs and then the household effectively. So I mean, for me, there's not much sense if I'm owning the bank, then I'm also trying based on like my own deposit.
Can you postpone this
Sure.
discussion after this?
Okay. So here is the calibration table, and again you will see that most of the parameters that I am coming from the literature are very standard. The only important, significant, interesting parameters that govern the dynamics of whatever is happening in the is given by this parameter gamma f, which is intensity, the persistence of the stock of the habit, and this. As I said, probably more than once that I have borrowed these parameters from the and Oliveira. So they didn't come up with these numbers out of thin air. They estimated these numbers using a GMM procedure for US data. And after I have showed you my baseline results, I'll also show you a couple of other exercises in which I will start decreasing both these 2 parameters, and I will be able to show you that my baseline results will go through. They will go through, and rest of the parameters are very standard. For the bank shock, the baseline is the 1 standard deviation. I don't think it should be controversial at all. 1 standard deviation is like very baseline, and the persistence of bank shock is also 0.9. It's not very high, but later on again I will change the parameters and I'll be able to show you some interesting results. So this is the baseline. So yeah, all the calibration values have been targeted as this here. So this is probably the most important set of results that I show usually. So this is what we call impulse response functions. On the horizontal side axis, you have quarters. So 20 quarters is 5 years, half a decade, 4 quarters a year, 5 years. And on the vertical axis, you have percentage deviation. So after a shock, how much rate was by what percentage will it move? So the solid blue line captures the case with bank fund lending relationship. And let me remind you, the dashed line is the case with our bank fund lending relationship. Nothing fundamentally changes between the 2 versions. I only set the 2 parameters equal to 0, gamma L and voice. So you will see that after negative bank shock, the spread jumps by almost 0.1 to 0.14. If you consider bank fund lending relationship, it jumps by a lot. When the spread rises, the spread is what determines how expensive or how cheap it is to take out the from a bank. So when spread jumps, loans become quite expensive to obtain, so loans decline by more than 2%. All the investment in this model is directly tied to your ability to take out loans. So if loans fall, your investment must also fall. And again, investment is not determines what is the startup capital available to you. So capital falls, and notice how persistently it falls. Almost becomes like a horizontal line in the case of bank lending relationship. So you have rising spread, then fall in loans, investment, capital. If the amount of deployed capital is falling, wages must also fall. So initially they fall, then they go back up as households increase their labor supply, but they settle at a level slightly below the equilibrium, and the total consumption also falls because wages have fallen. And I have not brought in the deposit, but as I said, that deposit and loans are one-to-one mirror image in this model. So if loans are falling, remember that deposits will also fall. For the household, they have only two revenue streams: interest rate on deposits and wages. So if wages are falling, and if the amount of deposits are also falling, the deposit income that are obtained by maintaining deposit the bank capital also fall. So if you sum all of these forces, you will see a fall in aggregate consumption too. Again, I'm still talking about only bank lending relationship. And again, remember, the output is nothing but the sum of investment and aggregate consumption. So if you have fall in investment and a fall in aggregate total consumption, you must see a persistent decline in output. Even after 5 years, half a decade, you see that output has not gone back to this equilibrium. And if you look at what happens in the case of no bank lending relationship, the spread jumps only by 0.15, less than 0.2%, but it's very persistent. In this period of half a decade, it does not reach its previous equilibrium. So what impact does it have? Your loans do not fall by as much. Why? Because the spread hasn't risen enough. But unlike the previous case, when the spread jumps, then it falls below the previous equilibrium, and then it stays negative for a couple of quarters, maybe 4, 8, 3 years. And I will explain why it is so. So it becomes cheaper, and that's why then you see a recovery in loans and investment. This thing is not here. Spread rises again, allow it to repeat. The spread rises only by a fraction of the case with bank lending relationship, but it stays high persistently, never becomes negative in these 5 years. As a result, loans become persistently depressed. They never even reach the case with bank lending relationship. Forget about exceeding them, they do not even touch them. And that's why you see a very persistent fall in investment. You see like almost below U curve, almost entirely below this solid line. And that's why you see a greater fall in capital, because you have a more persistent fall in investment. And again, this greater fall in deployed capital manifests in a larger fall in wages, larger fall in aggregate consumption, and a more persistent fall in output. And why is this so? Because if you have bank lending relationship, that gives banks market power. So when there is a negative shock, banks realize that our effective loan repayment is declining. So in order to mitigate that negative impact, initially the rate is spread by a lot because they have market power in their variety of loans. When they raise their spread a lot, it becomes more expensive to obtain loans. That's why loans fall by more than twice the case of no bank lending relationship. But banks also realize, again, because of deep habits, that we cannot keep our spread high perpetually. If we decrease our spread to the point where it crosses the previous equilibrium, becomes negative, and stays there for a couple of quarters, many of these borrowers, because of deep habit, will be with us even in subsequent years or a future period. So we stand to make higher profits, which is sum of two forces. Because of bank lending relationship, you have market power, so you can increase spread almost 5-6 times than this case. So this is your short-term consideration. But you also know that because of deep habits in borrowing, many of these borrowers will be logged in with us if we manage to acquire them, if we manage to lure them. And how to do that? By lowering your interest rate to the point, lowering your spread to the point where it becomes negative and it stays there at least for 2-3 years. And this dynamics is missing in the version of the model without bank lending relationship. That's why you don't see like 5 times more jump and then a fall in the previous equilibrium. And that's why those fall only by almost 1%, but they never recover like you see in the case of bank lending relationship.
If the later rates drop, so I think then we say, but in after 10 period, labor is still decreasing and the wage is also decreasing.
So initially you have, after, because amount of capital is declining. So if you are not deploying that much capital, you don't need that. Yeah. So if your business are declining and if your household, people go.
After 10 period, the labor is also declining.
You mean this one?
Yeah.
So I don't know what. So I'm not sure like what happens in just like quarter one, quarter two, but if you look at what's happening over the entire period, because of wages are declining, you need to work more to up in the same income because as a household you want to smooth the consumption. If you start declining, the only way you can still mitigate the impact of that loss of income is by working more, and that's why as wages decline, you have to increase the labor supply. And then you probably see like a little bit of fluctuation that could be because of numerical approximation. But the aggregate story is that if wages decline, you must increase the labor supply as a household. And so do I have 5 minutes?
Yes.
So my apologies, I'm just doing a quick sense. So as I promised in the beginning that since the calculation model, people will have all this question that what happens if you take the training values for the key parameters. So here I perform exactly the same simulation. I do not test the model at all. I only change the value of the intensity parameters on my. So in the baseline I had 0.72, but now I consider 0.62, 0.52, and 0, which is the case with our bank funding relationship. And you will see that higher is the intensity parameter, higher is the movement in spread, higher is the fall in loans, and then you have a lot of downstream impact through investment and impact on capital. And it's almost like monotonic. Higher is the intensity of bank fund lending relationship, greater is the impact of bank shock. So that is one result, but the other result is that even if I vary this parameter, my results are robust. So you see numerical differences because of course I'm changing the numerical value of a parameter, but qualitatively my result is the same. And now the second important parameter is the ROAS parameter, which governs the persistence of a stock of habit. So in the baseline, I have 0.85, I call it high persistence. Now I consider two alternative values, 0.75, 0.65. Again, you can see that higher the persistence, greater is the movement in spread, and then rest of the variables follow. Greater, larger increase in spread, then bigger fall in loans, bigger fall in investment capital, and so on. So again, if you have a more persistent bank fund lending relationship, then they will magnify the impact of the bank shock. And now I have only two last slides of impulse response function. So here in the baseline, I considered one standard deviation of bank shock. I will now show you the impulse responses with 1.5. So I increase it by 50%. You will see that in every case, if you increase the standard deviation of the bank shock, their impact will increase because of larger movement in spread. The interesting result is that in each case, you will know that if you consider bank fund lending relationship at larger volatility, the impact will be larger, but they will go back up almost to the previous baseline case. But that is not true if you consider the case without bank fund lending relationship. You have a much more noticeable impact at larger volatility of bank shock if you focus on the case without bank fund lending relationship. And finally, last set of results in which I vary the parameter of the bank shock. So in the baseline, I had 0.9. Now I consider a very persistent bank shock, 0.99. And the only panel that I'll focus on will be output. You will notice that when I have 0.99, output falls but goes back to the previous equilibrium. Macroeconomic activity recovers, but that is not true if you consider a very persistent bank shock. Macroeconomic activity will fall by a larger amount at initial impact and eventually will settle at a level which is considerably lower than the previous equilibrium. And why will that be? Because of larger increase in spread, it will fall, but you probably cannot see it here, but at some point around quarter 10, the spread will cross the solid blue line and remain elevated for a very persistent period. So spread remaining elevated for a persistently long period will make loans persistently expensive. So loans will decline for a very long time. And if you have a very persistent fall in loans for 5 years, 10 years, then that will reflect in a very persistent fall in investment, capital, wages, and sum everything you have up. So what was I trying to do in this paper? So most of the literature on financial frictions focuses on financial shocks hitting the borrowers, mostly firms and entrepreneurs. There is a less number of papers which focus on credit disruption happening from the supply side, and again, I might be wrong, I'm very happy to be corrected, but to the best of my knowledge, nobody has examined the impact of this kind of shocks in an environment which takes into account bank from lending relationship. And that I showed you initially that there is a lot of empirical evidence, there are a lot of people who have documented significant presence of bank from lending relationship. So I built a very simple setup which showed you that if you focus on one particular iteration of financial shock, which I call bank shock, which reduces the effective amount of bank loan repayments, you have very interesting results. If you ignore the presence of bank from lending relationship, you have a very persistent decline in macroeconomic activity. And this is something, my apologies, I forgot to mention that. So this is something I couldn't mention, but when I was doing my literature review, but this is a very recent paper by Bonchani, Gautam, and Ken Gieser. It just came out with a review of economic dynamics. They have both a VAR exercise and a model, I think, of Berardi and Cutler type, and they document that financial recessions are very different from other economic recessions in the sense that the impact of financial recessions lasts very long. In their exercises, macroeconomic activity doesn't recover even for a decade. I'm showing you only for 5 years, but in their exercises, the financial shocks leave very long-lasting scars. So my paper provides an alternative model, an alternative theory to look at how bank shocks of particular kind that I consider in this paper can have very interesting and important macroeconomic consequences. Something again which I haven't done might be the best time, but Moonshine and Gopher have found something very similar.
So my more question is there is a
in positive function, I'm showing you, we are only showing you percentage deviation from before the shock hit. In absolute terms, I don't know what the interest rate is. Could be anything.
But in general, if investors can also tie to the central bank investment, right? So
That's true. So if you want to talk about, for example, central bank, that means you need to probably specify monetary policy, right? Monetary policy meaning price level, inflation, right? So this is something I didn't want to focus on, number one, and this model cannot do that with an RBC model, so it's a real model. So that is something that can be done logically, but even need a different set. The moment you say central bank, that means you need inflation price level, tailor rule, something like this.
I have a different type of, sorry,
Yeah, sure.
I mean, good question.
Sure.
With this model that you made,
Yeah.
the results that you're getting,
Yeah.
is it because of too much of this interplay between the income generated and the firm's investment? Because we're talking about labor income and all those things. Because of the representative firm, you're talking about representative individual. So this cycle of income generation, savings, and all that thing is coming through within the model, rather than the reality of you have one set of, for instance, the depositors in banks can be different from the investors in the banking sector, stock market, and all that. I may not be investing in that bank, and I could be depositing in some other bank.
Yeah, sure.
So if you have that, this cycle, endogenous cycle, the results that you are getting, is it not largely because of that kind of cycle that you are generating?
So I would say this, that a lot of this fall in, if you just focus on this planning, for example, output, this is what people in macro mostly love to talk about, what happens to output. So if you look at what's happening here, this is a sum not only of.
I don't know the literature of this, so I'm probably asking you very dumb questions.
No, it's a very good question. At least helps think straight about certain issues. So if you look even at empirical evidence, you will see that after financial shock, the bank heading to the reject productive sector, which are mostly firms, which need to borrow to make investment, pay people wages, meet their working capital requirement. That falls very persistently. And you have a very similar pattern in my model. Obviously, it's a very different channel, bank from lending model. But again, if you see that in half a decade, 5 years, the investment doesn't recover. But that is only one part of the story. Because of very persistent fall in investment, you have a very persistent fall also in capital and wages. And in this model, obviously, all the deposit maps 1 to 1 with those. So deposit falls, the deposit income that you as a household that also falls. And that translates into a very persistent fall in credit consumption. So What I'm trying to say, when you look at this question, like why do we have a very persistent fall after negative bank shock? Then through this lens of my model, it is because I have very persistent fall in investment and very persistent fall in connection, which I think conforms very well with the reality. If you have very, if you like the paper that I just cited, don't try. If you have financial recessions or any significant financial shock, you have very consistent fall in investment, which is probably because bonds cannot, entrepreneurs cannot borrow that much. Could be again because of rising rates. It could be some other channel which is reducing the equity cost.
You see, there is a contemporary problem that is happening in India today. There are a lot of banks, including the Reserve Bank, they're worried that deposits are not coming from the household, they're going to mutual funds and all that.
Yeah,
But that is the difference that I'm talking about.
Sure.
So the deposits did not come from the same individual.
Yeah.
But through the wealth effect, they should be consuming.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
there is a misperception there in the banking sector. Deposits may not be coming.
Yeah.
Okay, to the banks, but they're making a lot of money, out of which they could be making consumption, expenditure. So that's the kind of thing I'm saying. There is a difference between disjunction between the deposits coming to the banks and the investors.
Absolutely. This part of obviously deposit and loans are one to one match.
You match them together.
If you plot them, for example, loans, panel B, and deposit, and then plot loan, and deposit, you won't be able to have.
Please, sorry, to cut this discussion, but we're out of time and
Sure.
we will take up this discussion.
So before I'm going to leave, let me thank you once again for inviting me here. So thank you very much to the organizers and IGIDR for giving me this opportunity to talk about my work. And yes, I appreciate the chance to be here and talk about.
So you are being quite, so the way I did interpret it was